This is where we're going to get a bit more fun for you and a bit less fun for these guys. And so yesterday we had a wonderful student competition where our students were given a challenge to explain themselves and their work in 3 minutes. And we thought, that skill that you shouldn't diminish as you get older. That skill should only get better as you get older. And so we're here to test that theory with our five largest grant holders. So between them, these 5 people are spending £55 million of good foundation money. And this is the audit committee in front of you. And so you've got 3 minutes each to answer 3 questions, or to try and tell us. Number 1, why should we care about your work? Okay. Number 2, what big challenges are you addressing? Now, 1 and 2 may be similar, who knows? And number 3, what's your personal motivations in this, okay? So that's how the first half of this is going to go. You have 3 minutes each and 2 minutes of questions. And I want everyone to be really asking some good questions like you did to the students yesterday, okay? Where's Richard? What's a good crack? You might want to ask Aamir that. What kind of cracks are good cracks? Because, Okay, so all those testing questions the students got, we want for these guys. Then in the second half of this session, we're going to sort of change pace a little bit and ask some more panel-type questions, but not about technical things, more about life skills, and we'll see if you've got any, okay? So, wonderful. We're going to go in the order of the program, so if you've got your program up here, it's alphabetical order. We have Vicky at the front, who's going to give you a 1-minute warning, holding up a card. You want to show? And she's also going to give you a sarcastic-looking face, like she's honed. Oh, that's another life skill that Vicky's got there. and we also have Mike, who's going to be.
I need to test your Pavlovian responses.
When that goes off, everyone claps, and you have to be quiet, okay? And that's I love this kind of thing. It's like Taskmaster, isn't it?
We won't be as nice as we were to students. They won't see the countdown timer that I'm holding.
Yeah.
They'll get the 1-minute warning, but then it's up to them, because these guys are so much more experienced and they'll be able to nail it.
Okay. All right, so first up, we're going to have Andrew, who's going to show us how to nail it. And you got the timer? You tell us when the time starts, Mike.
3 minutes. Starting.
Right, start nailing. Okay, so I'd like you to come and visit our new Experiential Learning and Creativity Centre. Why is this important? Well, it's a unique capability. It sits on top of a data mine that is globally unique. Within it, we can mine 40,000 investigations taken place over the last 40 years. We can look at 800,000 inspection reports and 2.8 million reports of accidents. That's all available to you to come and help co-create solutions to really difficult workplace problems. Why is it going to work? Well, because we have a world-class team of outstanding data scientists who are working already to make the best value from that enormously valuable data pool. We're going to open branches all over the world because we're going to tap into other data sources as we develop our approaches, and that will give us better insights into some of those really intractable problems and will help us to share that information with organizations around the world. What will our team get out of it? Well, they will get enormous creativity opportunities, they will get enormous learning opportunities, and we hope to be able to share that learning with you, because one of the great things about our Creativity and Experiential Learning Centre is that we can blow things up, we can set fire to things, we can create explosions that you can feel rattling inside your body. And what better way would there be to talk to you about the dangers of work and how to avoid them? So we want you to come and work with us. We can't do it by ourselves. The best value from our activities will be gained from your insights, and without your help, we won't have the opportunity to deliver the best that we possibly can from our Lloyd's Register Foundation programme, which is all about discovering safety within the rich seams of data that we have beneath our world-class Experiential Learning and Creativity Centre. So I urge you to pack your bags after this event, to get your thinking caps on, get on the train to the north of England and come and enjoy some time working with us on this exciting, challenging programme. Thank you very much indeed.
20 seconds. Questions?
Did anyone notice that he didn't talk about his personal motivation? So it just avoided that completely.
My team's
His team's
motivation.
motivation.
He's a leader.
Oh, is that right?
I listened to Adam this morning.
Hey, come on, there must be something tough here.
I'll ask one.
Would you give him £10 million for that, guys?
What can people come to you to do that they can't do anywhere else?
Well, if they can blow things up in their offices and they can set fire to things in their facilities, then yes, we wouldn't be able to offer them anything they couldn't experience. But with 550 acres of rolling Peak District countryside at our command, we can give you those experiences on a daily basis.
Oh, yeah. Oh, question over there. Elaine.
Make it sound a bit like it's your database. And I think when I'm listening to how other people really make this work, it kind of becomes an open data set and shared data. Is that the plan?
Absolutely, yes. So the data that we have has been generated through the work that we do as the UK regulator. And because we recognise that there is increased value that we could provide from it, that's where the conversation with the Lloyd's Register Foundation started from. But the intent is to create that data pool in a form that is available to others to dive into as well and have a play, have a swim around and see what strokes they can do.
Super. And I think we've got time for one more question for Andrew.
So what do you want from me? And what do I get back? So what's my return on investment, even if the investment isn't money?
We want your data, we want your problems, and together we will be able to create some solutions to the problems that you're not able to solve by yourself.
Super. Thank you very much, Andrew. Right. Okay, so our benchmark has been set in good Chief Scientific Advisor style. And next up we have Mark Girolami on behalf of the data population. And Mark?
3 minutes, starting now.
So why should you care about data-centric engineering? The question should really be, why do you want to jump out of bed early in the morning to get involved with this program in data-centric engineering? If you think about what engineering has done over the many years, the clean water systems that we enjoy, the fresh water that we can drink, it's safe, it's pure, that is all an absolute miracle of engineering ingenuity. The clean air that we breathe, unless we cycle across London via Euston Road, then we can be grateful for an awful lot of the engineering expertise in keeping our environment safe and clean. Power and energy, electricity, the lights that lights up our own lives, that keep us safe, warm and fed. Faraday on the left, one of the great engineers. Engineering has developed all that. Transportation, shipping, cars, trains, aircraft, space flight, providing an interconnected world that we never had before. And now we're talking about electronic cars, self-guided cars, self-guided aircraft and so forth. Health devices, and so forth, all engineering. Communication, our iPhones, we couldn't survive without these now. There's been such a disruption. And of course it was Lord Kelvin, Baron Kelvin from Largs, my own town, hometown, was the first engineer to lay the transatlantic communication cable from the UK to the USA. And the one thing that's transforming all of that is the advent of data. People are calling it the new oil. People are calling it the fourth industrial or the fifth industrial revolution. And our program is in the vanguard of defining this discipline. It's in the vanguard of developing the next future engineering leaders who are going to make our world safer, securer, more enjoyable. What are the big challenges? Well, fortunately, I had the foresight to bring Emma and Jennifer today, and they told you this morning what some of the big challenges are. Ensuring that our infrastructure is resilient, monitoring complex systems. And what about the motivation? Everyone is excited about being part of something that really matters, that makes a difference to life in general and makes the world a much safer place. 10 seconds left.
Oh.
And questions, please.
Simon Reeve, Lloyd's Register. Thank you, Mark. Given that ATI sits on the Euston Road, and for those that aren't familiar, that's one of the worst air quality roads in London, is there something specific that data can do to improve the situation and therefore demonstrate a result in the short term?
Yes, well, in fact, our program, our Lloyd's Register Foundation Data-Centric Engineering program, is working directly with the Greater London Authority, with the Mayor's Office, and helping on the Clean Air Initiative that's recently been set up. And one of the key things about data is ensuring that you get the right data, that you get the good quality data across the whole of the city to ensure that we can identify where are the environmental hotspots that we really need to look at making some sort of decisions as to how to improve the quality of air. So we're actually working with them at the moment, and we anticipate in the next 18 months to have some very exciting things to tell you about, which hopefully will be reductions in NO2 particulate concentrations and so forth, but we'll see.
So, Mark, you've given us a big, long list of things that engineering has done, and now with added data can do. What can't you do?
Oh, that's almost as bad as some of the questions we got at the Royal Institution on Tuesday evening. What can't we do? Well, with only £10 million over 5 years, with only a limited number of things that we can really put our focus on and target, and that's why that long list isn't actually as long as I would certainly like to see it.
These two sound like planted questions. Do you need more funding, Mark? Is that
I always need more funding.
I think you paid for those two questions. Last question, not cash for questions.
Dave Massell. I went to a primary school at the foot of what is the Westway, and it was there because my great-grandmother went there last century before. What will you do for the denizens of this dirty road with your big data sets?
What would I do with...
So people like me, that we had a lecture here not so long ago where it was said that the biggest determinant on whether you get a degree or not is the quality of air. So based on that assumption, what will you do for the denizens of that dirty road now that you've got your data sets and you look back?
How are your data sets going to help people who live along the dirty roads of London?
Well, I think that the key thing is actually profiling the whole urban environment and being able to identify those that are at risk because of exactly where they are living. And that data is what's going to give us those critical and crucial insights to identify, not the people that are, like me, cycling up and down Euston Road, but those that are actually living in quite dangerous places, and then feeding that as evidence to policymakers and so forth. Right, I got a thumbs up there.
Excellent. One more.
I promise it's not a setup to invite Mark to ask for more money. The quick question I had was, any lessons learnt so far, Mark, in terms of encouraging business interests and commercial parties to participate and share data? So any lessons learned about how to drive higher levels of industrial engagement?
So I think there's a number of answers to this. One of them, in terms of lessons learned, is that the academic or the research culture is one that works on 3-year project life cycles. And that's ingrained in the culture from those that are studying for PhDs, those that are chasing their first academic position and so forth. What businesses want are 3-month, 6-month at the most sprints to evaluate whether there is a value proposition in something that they want to tackle. And then within that 3-month sprint, they can make a decision to do something strategic further on or to drop it. And being able to marry those two different length scales or time scales up is quite a difficult lesson that I've been learning and been trying to put into play. Now, in terms of companies sharing their data, well, if data is the new oil, then they're not going to, there are many inhibitors for them sharing their data, intellectual property. There's an awful lot of value in data. The data that Andrew's spoken about just didn't fall out of the sky. There's a huge investment in that. And so there are a number of inhibitors that we have to work around. It's certainly something that's very much on my, not even on the radar, it's staring me in the face as to how we resolve those two particular issues.
We're going to have one last question. It's going to be from Richard, because he's got a really wicked look on his face right now. And he's the chief executive, and he's the chief accounting officer for U5. So go for it, Richard.
Yeah.
Mark, your answer to Gail's implanted question that you said you needed more money to do. My question is, and you said, this is a £10 million 5-year grant. You're halfway through, so you burned half of it so far. What has Turing delivered so far that demonstrably enhances the safety of life and property?
So I think, first of all, I would disagree that we're halfway through. I'm only 18 months into the program. But I think what we've delivered, again, as my two colleagues showed today, is a program that is absolutely committed to not spending that 10 million down, but actually growing it. We believe that we are developing and defining a new and emerging discipline. We are working with industries, we are working with the learning societies, we're working with the professional societies to develop the whole notion of data-centric engineering, to provide the education for the new professionals that are going to be data-centric engineers. So I think that whole infrastructure of convincing career young academics that this is an exciting thing to do, and so you can invest some of your time in talking to engineers rather than just working with mathematicians or statisticians. And we also have quite senior academics who are providing vision and leadership for those 3 grand challenges. So I think that we've already delivered that, which wasn't something that just fell out of the sky. There's a huge amount of energy. There's a huge amount of cohesion to actually push forward some of the grand challenges, some of the themes, and some of the many projects. And for those of you that aren't familiar with the projects, go to our website and you'll see lots of them. The really nice presentation that Heis from MX3D gave, we in our program are leading in all of the data-centric components, the digital twinning and so forth. So I think that we've, in the 18 months that we've been alive and kicking, I think we've actually delivered a fair amount, and there's much more to come, of course.
It's a lovely contrast to the students yesterday, isn't it? Whereas if you ask their question halfway through a PhD, it says, well, I don't know, I haven't got my results yet. But you might have a much fuller reply to that. Okay, we need to move this along. So in the middle, we have Nancy Kete, and Nancy runs our Resilient Shift program, and we're going to see how resilient you are, Nancy. So, or how shifty she is, indeed.
Yeah. So life matters. Well, yeah, it does. And the safety and well-being of billions of people around the world depend on infrastructure, and particularly on the critical services that infrastructure delivers. And those services are whether they are provided with something they want, whether they're protected from something they don't want, or whether they're connected the way they need to be. And to do this, whatever the future has in store, because the future is not going to be like the past. So that is, life relies on the resilience of critical infrastructure. But we don't design for resilience, and we don't develop projects for resilience, and we certainly don't operate them for resilience. And moreover, the world is becoming increasingly volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous. So knowing all that, what do we do? And in particular, if you're an engineer, what do you do to design, deliver, and operate critical infrastructure resiliently? That's the challenge of the resilience shift. That's the challenge we're addressing. We're a global initiative to reorient professional practice from a focus on infrastructure as an asset to a focus on infrastructure as part of a system that provides services under both ordinary and extraordinary circumstances. So right now, some of you are probably saying, huh? So we had all these words on our proposal to Lloyd's Register Foundation, and I think what we accomplished in our 18 months or whatever it is, we realized that it's really simple. How do you do resilience? How do you value resilience? And once you figure that out, how are you going to scale up resilience practices so they become business as usual across the professions? Because life matters, resilience matters. So our second deceptively simple challenge is to resolve, how much does resilience matter? And to whom? And how do you know? In the interest of time, I think that we're going to find out when we explore this second question about how much resilience matters and to whom and how we know, is we're going to need a new economics of resilience. Because the economic frameworks on which decision-making about critical infrastructure hangs is specious, and it's in the way. So that, what I'm trying to say is neither the theory, the neoclassical economic theory and welfare economics that's a derivative of that, nor the practice of economics, which has all this technique, mathematical technique, supports decision-making for resilience. And in the interest of time, I have to leave the theoretical critique aside, but I'm sure I'll get questions. I want to give you an example to make it tangible. In the practice of engineering economics, the techniques that we use to apply the theory, it's just not going to suit. One reason mainly is because those techniques are based on theory and they're about efficiency. But resilience, I did it. I'm going to finish this sentence. Resilience needs slack. Resilience requires reserves, extra, redundancy, diversity, so a system can cope with extraordinary events, and we don't have an economic framework to allow that to happen. Thank you.
One of the definitions of resilience is the ability of a system to keep going, right?
Persistence is a big part of it.
Nice lesson, a learning moment there for us. Okay.
Do we have questions? I'll kick us off. One of the challenges that engineers face is that they may inherit a system where resilience wasn't designed in, and the current budgetary restrictions mean that it's not going to be operated sustainably in a resilient way. So what sort of approaches can be taken in instances like that?
I think there's a couple of parts to your question. One is that I would say that there's some good thinking, and it can start to be applied with respect to new infrastructure, new builds to be more resilient. But the harder question is, what do we do with the existing fleet of infrastructure facilities? And that is a much harder question. And it's why we use this value chain approach. We're trying to find what are the tools and frameworks you can use, for example, if you're operating infrastructure. The second part of your question, though, has to do with your implicit that the budgetary system won't allow it. And what will happen, I think, in the real world is there'll be catastrophic failure and loss of life, and then whoever makes the rules on those budgetary systems will be forced to change. I think that's happening now with the Office of Water, for example, in the UK, And it's happened to a certain extent in the United States. I wish there were a smoother path to making decisions for resilience up front before the boom, before the flood, before the building falls down. But socially, we don't operate that way. So I think that's where those changes will come from.
Super. We've already got two. Oh, we've got one over there and one over there. There first. Yeah, over there. Thanks.
Mike Parsons, Safety Critical Systems Club. Could I just ask, do you think the nature of the threats to resilience are changing? In particular, I'm thinking about cybersecurity type threats. I think that changes the picture completely for me, anyway.
Yes, I do. I think there's a couple kinds of changes. One is, if you think about the future is changing in a way that we haven't seen it before. We haven't been aware of it before. For example, the threats related to climate change. Those are non-stationary, so we really don't know what to do with those. Cyber is also, in a certain way, even though it's socially introduced, a non-stationary threat. We don't really know how to deal with it. And from what I've read from some of the research in the UK particularly, we really don't know, we don't manage or even think through the cyber system and the other systems that it connects with. And so that's new ground. When we think about what we would advise on that, we think that's sort of next and new. There really needs to be research as opposed to here's what you do on Monday morning. I don't think we have here's the what you do on Monday morning question or advice yet.
Is there one last question? Yep. Oh, we've got two more. Fine.
Oh, because my question has partly been answered. So let's move on rather than asking something that we've partly had.
Hi, Nancy. Andrew from UL. I'm a little curious. So in this one case, the past is not the best predictor of the future, and the classic economic theories which built everything we have today as modern society can't be used to argue for resilience. How are you going to sell this to decision makers?
It depends at what level. So we do, for example, the finance community does decision-making under deep uncertainty. And there are, decision science gives us a lot of clues on how to deal with complexity. What's happened, I think, in most of our lives, and certainly in the lives of regulators, is we've simplified the world in such a degree that we think that's a good representation of the world, and therefore we can support the decisions. And so I think that bringing in what we know from complexity science and trying to figure out how it can actually support real decision-making is what's going to happen. How to sell it to decision makers, I'm afraid most of them are going to have to, have the duty and fail at their duty of care, because that's around the world how people, my observation of how people are doing better with respect to expanding what they think their job is from figuring out value for money using some other efficiency objective and not letting the utilities or the others, build in some slack, create some redundancy.
Okay, super. Thank you very much, Nancy. Okay, so our next victim is Aamir Khalid, who is Director of Technology at the Welding Institute. And the Welding Institute is our longest, out of the 5 panelists here, the longest grant. It's already 3 years in, I think. And it's also our largest grant, so you can be extra harsh on Aamir, okay?
Okay. Right. So my name is Aamir Khalid. I'm the Technology Director of TWI, and working with Lloyd's Register Foundation and their grant, we are looking at how safety critical structures fail. So be they aeroplanes, bridges, ships, and all kinds of offshore structures. And just one of the failure mechanisms is corrosion. And just to give you a statistics, $2.5 trillion are spent every year on, that's the cost of corrosion. That's 3.4% of world GDP. And the kind of research that we're doing, we are developing innovative coatings to prevent corrosion. We're looking at condition monitoring sensors. We're looking at inspection technology, corrosion resistance alloys, all of this to reduce corrosion. Now, we got the 15 million from Lloyd's, and we added another 30 million from TWI and BP. We then went to government and got about 35 million from them. So altogether, when you add all of this, it's a 120 million pound program. We are training 330 PhDs, 200 masters, and we are getting 60 professors, researchers to look at this problem. Because we've been running more than 3 years, we've got some PhDs through, we've got some technologies which are very exciting, and Lloyd's Register group has joined us in having a joint company called Fulliger Technologies. Simon Reeve, Helen West, a number of us are working together to take those technologies to market. Now, each of our PhDs has an industrial sponsor, all 331 of them. We make sure they finish. They have a 94% success rate of finishing, and we're chasing the ones that are late down. We have 100% completion on masters, and we have 100% employment, because a lot of these people have already qualified. Now, I'll answer the personal motivation question. At the age of 13, I came to Britain, and my father said, well, I didn't speak any English, but he said that I brought you to this country, we've left our family, we've left our country, and you will become a doctor. No pressure then. UK has the best education system, that's why we're here. So I got my PhD, an MBA, and a BSc, and a master's. And I thought, right, how do I now terrorize as many people as I can with PhDs? So that's why we got this program. We've got a number of PhDs here, and I make sure that they will finish, all 330 of them, and all the 200 masters. They'll get their PhDs, and they'll get them in an industrial environment so they can have a good career. Thank you.
Okay, questions then, please. Richard.
Students and the fact that you wanted all of them to complete in time and to be successful. You gave a lot of numbers, but I've heard a lot also of presentation putting humans in the center of everything. So how do you ensure that your students don't break under the load and the stress that they are going through?
Can I just ask, are you a student at TWI?
Yes, I am.
Thank you. And you're being filmed, Aamir, just so.
How do I answer that? I think we are looking at, we work with the universities to see if there's mental health issues, things like that. Each student has an industrial supervisor and a academic supervisor. And they're also working under a TWI section where there's a section manager. And ultimately, if there is a problem, I'm the last stop. So, and a lot of issues do come my way, and we do help. We've had issues like money problems where TWI has helped. We've had personal problems, relationship problems. We have a HR person dedicated to this. We have a doctor on site as well. So there's a number of mechanisms to make sure that if somebody is suffering through something, that is reported and we deal with it.
Super. I think Richard has a question next, and then at the back.
Hello, Ahmed. You mentioned some really impressive numbers. The financial gearing, the number of PhDs, number of MSCs, load of evidence that the engine's revving. What evidence is there that it's connected to the road and motoring?
In terms of, is the technology that's being developed getting into the market and making a difference? Is that the question? So we have, within 3 years, this is PhD research. It takes 3 years to do the research, then a few years to go through exploitation phase. And that's why the group has joined us, and we've identified 3 technologies. We're looking at roadmaps. And so I think to take a technology from a PhD into the marketplace, I think you need 5 years, maybe more. And so we're into the 4th year, and we've identified the technologies. One of the technologies is at Saudi Aramco being trialed, and we're working with the group now to take it to market.
So you've got one at the back there?
I have a question. Daryl Atwood, Lloyd's Register Foundation. This is to tie something together that Andrew said with what was just raised about mental health and stress and so on. I had a dear friend of mine who was a social worker for many years, and he worked with a company where he was responsible for human resources, plans and so on. And he spoke to me once about having a plan for things like mental health. What do? Do you have a plan for if some of your employees are that stressed that you're concerned about them harming themselves? So we talk about safety plans for offshore platforms, safety plans for ships and so on. And you mentioned having a doctor on staff and so on, and that you're responsible for dealing with these people. My impression is that in a lot of organizations, they try to do a lot of things, but a lot of it is in an informal manner. And I often remember my friend Rick telling me, what's the plan for all these people? Do you have a set series of things that you're going to do if you actually believe somebody's in real danger? So how structured and rigorous is the reaction, and will the reaction get to this sort of thing, which is going to become more and more prevalent as we go forward? Thanks.
So if we've had a number of, we've been doing this before the Lloyd's Register Foundation program SURF started. We'd been doing PhDs for 10 years before that. And we've had a number of incidences, as you would when you get to numbers like 400 PhDs with stress and various things. And so the system has worked, and it has worked informally and then in a formal manner. And we could do better, and we are looking at it.
Absolutely. There's a certain advantage to having the microphone here for me. I get to ask a subsidiary. I'd like to hear from Andrew about this. The oil and gas business, for example, how structured and rigorous is there a plan, an actual plan for dealing with this sort of situation? Or is it just we're sensitive to it, we have a doctor, we try to help these people? Or do you have, like we have for a lot of different safety issues, a formalized procedure and a plan?
It's a really good question. The fundamentals, I think, are that an organization needs to understand its people. By understanding its people, it can put in place good, effective line management. And to be honest, the good line management is the first line of defense against mental ill health caused by work. I would also look to good companies to have a stress risk assessment in place, and perhaps also which should include a combination of activities that help staff to understand mental ill health, how to respond to people with mental ill health problems, and also to reflect that we all have mental health. Some days it's good, some days it's bad. And it's recognizing when it's bad that can be very powerful as a tool to help those individuals who might be suffering to get through the day and to perform at their best. But it has to be structured around that mental health stress risk assessment model.
Super, and I think we're going to move on now, unless there's anything else pressing. We're going to move on. Oh, Jan, definitely, because, so Jan manages the TWI grant, and it's his chance to to ask the question he really wants in public.
Hello, Aamir. I've been looking forward to this. I'm often talking to our students, and there's a question I ask them when they're presenting their work, which they dread. So I want to ask it to you.
Okay.
How would you explain what you do to a 12-year-old?
Yes. My son is 18. He still asks me, "What do you do, Dad?" And I like to say that what we do is to keep safety. And you have to say, you're traveling in a plane, and I would say that, each of those rivets is actually a crack initiation point. It's not a good thing to say when you're traveling with your 12-year-old son. But you say that, look, we develop methods so we can detect these before they can be catastrophic. And you can give real-life examples like that. Not an aeroplane, though.
Yes. Yeah, and I don't think we'll be putting Aamir into our children's STEM program anytime soon. Okay, we're going to move on to our very last speaker and one of our newest programs as well. John's already had a chance this morning to explain what he does. So you got the second crack of the whip in 3 minutes, John. And
Right, well, I didn't manage this in, 25 minutes before, so try in 3 minutes. So why you should care, again, it's back to life matters, but particularly robotics and autonomous systems are here now, and the number of applications is growing. In many cases, the risks of these systems are not well understood or well managed yet, and we can't assess their safety using existing techniques and methods. So the program is going to directly address the issues of assuring and regulating robotics and autonomous systems so we can support their use in the real world to realize their benefits without compromising on safety and taking uncontrolled risks. Big challenges we're addressing, actually there are quite a lot of these. Many but not all arise from the use of artificial intelligence and machine learning in implementing systems. So there's a number of challenges here. One of those is actually lack of visibility of what has been learned. It's very hard to reason about a way a system does behave and will behave if we can't understand what the machine learning algorithms have deduced, the models of the world that they've built. We also have the inability to assess the safety of systems that learn in operation. Classical safety processes assume when we deploy a system, we know enough about it to say it's safe through life. Actually, this means we have to change our safety processes to carry on updating the models of safety through the operational life. As we saw from the example this morning of the accident in Temper, there are problems with false positives and false negatives in assessing situations, but also in decision making. And this is, if you like, a particular subclass of the problem of visibility, because if we don't know when those things can occur, we don't know what the problems are. And a fourth thing would be what's called distributional shift. So if I take a system that's learnt in one environment and move it to another, will it still work there correctly? So if I can recognize ships in Singapore, can I do so in the Baltic, where the lighting levels, the angle of the incidence of the sun, the sea state is different, and so on? Very hard. Personal motivations, well, this is a great way to avoid retiring, certainly much more interesting than sitting at home with my pipe and slippers. But more seriously, safety engineering has been around for maybe 40, 50 years, but it's really stagnant. Many of the techniques and methods are decades old, and they're increasingly incapable of dealing with the complexity of modern systems. It seems to me this is a really great opportunity to revitalize the discipline and enable it to catch up with the sorts of technology that we're currently developing and deploying, and thus to make a really, really significant contribution to safety of society over the coming decades. I had 8 seconds left, just like Mark. Whoa.
Okay. All right. Just a couple, I think. Two.
John, thank you. Really appreciated and was interested in your comment that the lack of transparency of what is being learned by machine learning systems. I think that's quite a deep comment, and you started to go into it a little bit more. What do you think the York programme can do to benefit from some of the things that the conversation was talking about before lunch with Asha?
I wasn't quite where I was expecting you to go. I mean, I think we should and can engage with the public in explaining how we can address some of those technical problems. And maybe the easiest way is actually to link it to something else. Under the General Data Protection Regulations, actually there's a right to explanations of decisions made by algorithms. That's normally thought of as things that might give you a mortgage or deny you a mortgage. But as I understand it, talking to the information commissioners, they see that as applying equally well to that sort of technology in a physical system such as a car or whatever. So I think my starting point would be say, yes, you do have a right to an explanation, but you do from the way these systems behave as well. You might not want it all of the time, but you have that right. And should there be an accident or an incident, that's actually when the explanation becomes really important, because it helps us to analyze that, to understand it, and try to prevent a recurrence of those sorts of problems.
You got a second question? Okay. Yeah.
John, thank you very much for that. How do you think we're going to cope with different locales around the world? So autonomy deployed in the UK, for instance, may have to behave differently in Greece or wherever.
I have a really simple answer to that, is I don't know. Let me hypothesize something, that for some classes of system, you might be able to parameterize them very simply. If I go back to image recognition, I'm trying to navigate a ship and I need to recognize other ships so I can tell how they will maneuver. It might be that how far north you are is a good enough parameter because you know enough about the angle of incidence of the sun, or it may be that plus the time of year. And the simple answer is I don't know, and I think that's one of the things that we actually have to explore. The way the program is intended to work is through demonstrators or use cases in particular domains. I think what we need to do is to work with people who are building and evaluating those demonstrators to ask these sorts of questions. But I think it's a really tough problem, and I very much doubt there's a simple solution. It might be that some of the sort of data mining that Mark and his colleagues do would enable us to tell, actually, here's a small subset of factors. You know, there's 47 variables, but it's actually these 3 that are critical in this area, and if we could identify that using some of their sort of analytical techniques, that might help us. But I'll go back to the beginning. I honestly don't know. Hopefully, if you ask me in 4 years' time, I might.
We have one last question for John. I love how long it took you to say I don't know, by the way.
Thank you.
Last question, Bob. Yeah.
Bob Varady, I'm at the University of Arizona. This is really not a question for John, it's a question for the whole panel, and it's in a way, no, I don't want everyone to answer, but it's also really a comment on everything we've heard the last 2 days. We keep hearing about various threats, cybersecurity, climate change, whatnot. And the premise underlying everything we've heard is that we need to harness rationality, do a better job of planning, of strategizing, of presenting results. But what do you do about the bigger threat that some of the decision makers at the very top and society not only don't buy this, but resist it, and in a pernicious way, set things up so that they reject all of the scientific information. Doesn't matter how good it is, they don't want it. How do we deal with that? That seems to me a major threat that's rising.
Yeah, I mean, since I was speaking last, let me try to address that. I mean, I agree it's a real problem and quite a difficult one. I think one of the things we have to do is actually to learn to understand how to speak to politicians and policymakers in a way that they understand. The way that will persuade people is to get them to see that what's being talked about is in their interests and aligns with their own objectives. You know, many countries, the UK included, you know, wants to be, you know, the place to do AI and the place to do robotics and autonomous systems. So I think actually that gives you an answer. Well, if you actually want to achieve that, then you've got to make sure you do it in such a way that you don't get a negative public reaction because of some problems that arise, and you can cite things like Cambridge Analytica, like some of the accidents that have occurred with autonomous vehicles as a motivation for doing that. Do I think it's easy? No, but I think that's what you have to do, and actually take it back to the things that they really care about, what they state as policy objectives, and show how the things that are being done actually support meeting those objectives.
Okay, I'm going to stop that there, and I'm also going to say a big apology to our students because we're going to move. We are going to move into the next phase, but we've got 2 minutes to do it. So, and the next phase was really, you know, I think that's been actually a very valuable insight and a very valuable discussion session, which is why I let it run further beyond the usual 2 minutes of questions that our students get. And what I'd really like to do is to repeat this exercise as your funding progresses to see how the answers are changing as well. I want to also say that one of the things for me as a research funder is, you know, I feel that my job is to help clever people do clever things, to support them doing clever, and it's a real privilege to work with you all, to support you and the ideas that you're having to make that work. Now, saying that, I've got this. Okay, so in theory, I love your question, Bob. You know, in theory, we're all rational beings. But here's one of my favourite Dilbert cartoons, where we're going to go around the table, give each other an update on our project, right? And the guy next to the boss says, "My project is a pathetic series of poorly planned near-random acts, and my life is a tragedy of emotional desperation." But it's more or less customary to say things are going fine, okay? All right. So the students have asked a few questions here, and this is where we want to sort of pick up on the theme, right? So that you've given us, you know, you've given us what it's more or less customary to say, but I just want to ask a few more personal questions, perhaps, and And feel free to say that you need a hug, but you're not getting one. But if you do need a hug, feel free to say it. There's people next to you to do that kind of thing. All right. All right. So I've only got time for 2 of these, I'm afraid. It's a real shame. There's a load in here. I have to say, there's a load in here asking for careers advice. What I want the students to do is, after the conference, just come and get these people and ask them for that careers advice, because I really respect the questions you're asking. Some of them even want jobs, okay? So if you've got jobs, make sure you advertise jobs going here, okay? So the first question out of the 2 is, what have you had to sacrifice? It actually says, do you have to sacrifice anything to obtain funding? Okay, now I don't want to really hear that because I gave you some funding. So I'm going to ask you more generally, what have you had to sacrifice for your careers? And I'm going to start with Andrew, because he went first before.
Thank you.
We'll run in the order, okay?
It's an interesting question. I think you inevitably have to end up sacrificing some of your family time, and that is a great sadness. But I think if you can engage your family in the conversations that encourage them to think about the work that you do, and to encourage them to take some ownership of what you do, then there's a way through that. My kids have grown up not wanting to do science. Now that may tell you something about the way that I've engaged with them about the topics. But what they do is they do their jobs in a way that I think encourages others to do the jobs with them in a healthy and safe way. So they do think about health and safety. My younger son has some mental health issues and has actually worked very hard with his current employer to get a system in place to enable him to deliver the best that he can. And I think by working together, by talking to him about what we would do as HSE, it's given him the courage and the personal power to go in and get his work to change what it did. So I think whilst there are sacrifices, you can also turn those into personal benefits as well.
Thank you, Andrew. Would anyone like to go next on the sacrifice question? Nancy?
I think I'll do the non-customary answer, which is, there are trade-offs. I don't know if I want to answer to sacrifices, but there are trade-offs. And it is particularly with kids. There was a time when my husband and I both had pretty high-stress jobs, and we would meet in airports and essentially pass the baton. And I think about my poor kid who's, had serial parenting, even though he had 2 parents. But that was the trade-off that we were making to have our maintain our careers. So we'd meet in airports and give the update on what's the kid doing, what's the dog doing, how's the house doing, what do we need to keep track of. But that said, sometimes when you're in that part of your life where you have kids, you have a lot of stress, there's a lot of stuff going on at home, it's really nice to get in a hotel room in a foreign country and get room service. It's not all bad, but there are trade-offs there.
Does anyone else want to answer that question from the panel? Okay, Aamir.
Right. Don't tell my boss, but I do this job for free. I just have fun. And having all these people that we've qualified, we see them in conferences and they do great work. The only regret is we'd like to see more of their work and enter the marketplace. That's what we'd like. But no, it's been fun.
You got one.
I just, where Andrew is, it takes a huge amount of your time. It's impossible to avoid that, and you do, lose some things. My daughters are a classicist and a musician, respectively, which I think says something similar to what Andrew was saying. But you do get a great deal back. You do get vicarious satisfaction when you see people, succeed in what they're doing because you've enabled that. So yes, you lose something, but you actually also gain a huge deal as well. And I think you have to see that in balance.
You got anything, Mark? Or I can move you on to the next one, which you might enjoy more, because I think this really fits you. And I just wanted to say, did somebody note that Aamir said he'd do it for free? Because so I think we have an overhead somewhere there on the grant. Okay, so the last one is, what's the weirdest thing you've ever had to do for your job? And Mark, I've been to many meetings with you where you've turned up in full cycle gear. Yes. And with captains of industry. In your world, it may not be weird to wear your cycle helmet and your cleats to a business meeting with Shell. But so I'm going to open that. This is the last one. What's the weirdest thing you've ever had to do in your job? Andrew, you're raising your eyebrows that you've got several.
Hours worth of material on this one. I'll pick one which was a piece of work I did probably about 15 years ago, where I was asked to go and look at an outbreak of ill health in a council office, which was built next door to a grain store. We got there and it was very clear what the problem was. The problem was a mouse infestation, or at least we thought it was a mouse infestation. So I had to climb up in my full protective gear, open up the lighting cases, which were yellow because they were filled with mouse urine, open up the suspended ceiling, which was just covered in mouse droppings and dead mice, and take some samples, do some air samples, take some samples from the people. And then we went back a couple of weeks later and had a meeting in the council office, and it was the most violent meeting I've ever been in. It didn't start well because there were two crossed swords at the back of the hall, ready for the people to give their own views on what we'd found. But essentially what we found was that it was poor leadership. Although they had this infestation of mice, it was actually poor leadership by the people who were just not dealing with the problems. And it goes back to the point I made earlier, that actually a lot of the problems of workplace health and safety can be solved by good leadership. Even mouse piss on a ceiling roof. If you've got a good leader, they will be able to sort that out.
Wonderful. Is there anyone else on that question? Nancy, you got a weird one.
It was the green hairy crab dinner in Shanghai. Green hairy crabs are a delicacy.
Hairy crabs.
Hairy crabs. They come out of the river. I happen to know the river's very dirty, but when you're trying to build up work in China, it's really important to do the dinners. And the other thing that happens is people that you're trying to work with get to go out for the dinners that they want because it's all on expense account. And I happened to arrive during green hairy crab season and had a couple of green hairy crab dinners in a row where you get it served 6 different ways, including a couple of raw ways. And that was really meeting the call of duty, I have to say.
Super. Okay, I am going to finish that session, but please join me to thank all of our guests for being Okay. Okay, we're going to move you on now. I think if you move off the stage, then you'll get a better view of the next. So I don't know if you've noticed that the title of the next session